Someone fed Grok AI every satellite image, every federal water report, every geological survey, and every climate data set ever recorded about Lake Mead. What the AI returned wasn't a summary, it was a timeline. A timeline showing how the largest reservoir in the United States has been dying in plain sight for over 2 decades, while 40 million people were told everything was under control. The findings didn't just surprise researchers, they exposed a pattern of decisions, buried data, and quiet institutional failures that traces all the way back to a single document signed in a room in Santa Fe, New Mexico, over 100 years ago. This is what Grok found. And this is why it changes everything you think you know about the American West, the reservoir the world forgot to watch. Before we go any further, there is something most Americans have simply never been told about the water they drink, the electricity they use, and the food on their plates. And once you hear it, everything that follows lands differently. Lake Mead is not just a lake, it is the single largest reservoir in the United States by volume. It was created in the 1930s when the Hoover Dam was built across the Colorado River, and at full capacity, it holds over 26 million acre-feet of water, enough to cover the entire state of Connecticut 10 feet deep. It stretches 112 miles behind the dam and covers 247 square miles of surface area. It provides drinking water to Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Los Angeles, San Diego, and hundreds of smaller communities across the Southwest. It generates over 4 billion kilowatt-hours of hydroelectric power every single year for Nevada, Arizona, and California. It irrigates millions of acres of farmland that grow the food Americans eat every day. Between November and March, more than 90% of the leafy greens and salad vegetables consumed in the entire United States come from farms that depend on the Colorado River. Lake Mead is not a convenience. It is the foundation beneath an entire region's survival. And right now, as of August 2026, Lake Mead has just broken its all-time record low. The water level has dropped to 1,040 feet above sea level, lower than it has been at any point since the reservoir began filling in 1935. The lake is approximately 27% full. Federal projections from the Bureau of Reclamation show it could plunge to 1,020 feet by July 2027 and potentially reach 1,011 feet by May 2028. If it reaches 895 feet, it hits what scientists call dead pool. Dead pool means the water is so low it can no longer flow past Hoover Dam by gravity. No water downstream, no hydropower, no irrigation, no drinking water for more than 25 million people. Sit with that for a moment. The largest reservoir in the most powerful country on Earth, the one that supplies water to 5 of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the Western Hemisphere, is 3/4 empty. It has been draining for over 25 years. And until very recently, the average American had absolutely no idea it was happening. Grok's analysis didn't just confirm the decline, it mapped the entire architecture of how it was allowed to happen, and the story it uncovered is one of the most staggering institutional failures in American history, the document that broke the river. To understand why Lake Mead is dying, you have to go back to November 24th, 1922. That is the date the Colorado River Compact was signed in the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe, New Mexico. 7 states sent delegates: Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Commerce Secretary Herbert Hoover oversaw the negotiations. The purpose was simple: divide the water from the Colorado River so every state could use it fairly. What happened instead was one of the most consequential scientific miscalculations in American history. The negotiators looked at river flow data to determine how much water was available to divide. The data they used covered a 22-year period from 1900 to 1921. What no one in that room knew, and what modern tree ring studies would later prove beyond any question, is that those 22 years represented the single wettest period the Colorado River had experienced in at least 500 years. Some researchers now say it may have been the wettest stretch in over 1,000 years. The negotiators didn't just overestimate the river, they measured it at its absolute peak and assumed that peak was normal. They allocated 15 million acre-feet per year to be split between the upper and lower basins, 7.5 million each, plus an additional 1.5 million eventually guaranteed to Mexico. That is 16.5 million acre-feet committed on paper. The actual long-term average flow of the Colorado River, based on centuries of tree ring data, is closer to 12 to 13 million acre-feet. In some years, it has been considerably less. The river was over-allocated the day the ink dried. Professor Shemin Gee and colleagues at the University of Colorado published research showing that the 1922 compact ignored available science even at the time. Early hydrological estimates suggested the river's long-term flows were lower than the period the negotiators used. Those estimates were dismissed. When Grok's pattern analysis cross-referenced the compact's allocations against the full tree ring record going back 1,200 years, it mapped what researchers had been quietly arguing for decades, but institutions had refused to say plainly. The Colorado River was never capable of delivering what the compact promised, not in 1922, not in 1950, not in 2000, and certainly not now, during what UCLA climatologist Park Williams has identified as the worst megadrought the region has experienced in at least 1,200 years. A study published in Nature Climate Change confirmed it. The drought gripping the American Southwest since the year 2000 is the most severe dry period in at least 12 centuries, and roughly 42% of the soil moisture deficit driving it is directly attributable to human-caused climate change. The rest would have happened anyway. Nature delivers mega-droughts on its own, but we made this one measurably worse. The compact didn't cause the drought, but it guaranteed that when the drought arrived, and history told us one eventually would, the system would have no margin of safety whatsoever. Every drop was already spoken for. That document, signed over a century ago by men who predicted the basin's population might quadruple from its 1915 level of 457,000, is still the legal foundation governing how the Colorado River's water is divided today. The population the river now serves is not 4 times 457,000. It is 40 million, more than 20 times what Herbert Hoover predicted. And the river has been asked to carry all of it. What the lake revealed. When the water began to recede, Lake Mead started giving up its secrets. And those secrets tell a story that no official report ever captured. In 2022, boaters near Haymanway Harbor spotted a rusted barrel protruding from the newly exposed lakebed. Inside it were human skeletal remains. The person had been shot. Personal items dated the death to the 1980s. Las Vegas Metro Police opened a homicide investigation. Within months, a second set of remains was found at Colville Bay, then a third, partially encased in mud along the shoreline, then a fourth at Swim Beach, then a fifth, then a sixth. 6 sets of human remains surfaced in a single year, pulled from the darkness by a retreating waterline. But the bodies were not the only thing Lake Mead had been hiding. Dozens of sunken boats emerged from the depths, including a World War II-era landing craft the National Park Service believes was a military surplus vessel used recreationally on the lake after the war. Entire marina docks that once floated on the surface now hang suspended in the air above dry ground, their pylons exposed like bones stripped of muscle. And then there was St. Thomas. In the northern arm of the lake, near where the muddy river feeds the Colorado, an entire town rose from the water, St. Thomas, Nevada, founded in 1865 by Mormon settlers who believed they were building in Utah, a thriving community of 500 people with a school, a post office, a hotel, farms, and an ice cream parlor. In 1928, President Calvin Coolidge signed the bill authorizing construction of the Hoover Dam. The rising waters of the newly formed Lake Mead swallowed St. Thomas whole. By 1938, the town was gone, submerged under 60 feet of water. The last resident, Hugh Lord, set fire to his own home and rode away. The town had surfaced before, during brief drought periods in 1945 and 1963. Families of former residents would return and hold reunions among the foundations of their old homes. One woman found her childhood doll buried in a mud bank, but each time, the water returned and the town vanished again. This time it hasn't gone back under. St. Thomas has been continuously exposed since 2002. The water is now nearly 30 feet below the town's remains. Crumbling concrete foundations, rusted engine parts, dry cisterns, and remnants of fence lines mark what was once a living community. The National Park Service has installed guideposts so tourists can walk through and understand what they are looking at. They are looking at a warning. That town disappeared because we built a dam and filled a reservoir. Now the reservoir is emptying and the town is coming back. The question is, what disappears next? The bathtub ring. If you have never seen Lake Mead in person, there is one image that tells the entire story without a single word of explanation. Around the entire perimeter of the lake, etched into the canyon walls, is a thick white band of mineral deposits stretching from the current waterline all the way up to where the water once reached. Scientists call it the bathtub ring. It is composed of calcium carbonate, the same mineral that leaves white scale on your faucets and stains the inside of a teapot. When the water was high, the minerals adhered to the rock. When the water dropped, they stayed behind. That white line is now over 170 feet above the current water level. You can see it from space. NASA satellite images comparing Lake Mead in August 2000 to August 2026 show a body of water that has visibly shrunk, its deep blue surface surrounded by an expanding halo of bleached shoreline. University of Nevada, Las Vegas hydrology professor David Creamer explained that Lake Mead loses more than 6 feet of water depth every single year just from evaporation. The exceptionally hot spring and early summer of 2026 likely accelerated those losses by driving evaporation even earlier in the season. The water isn't just being consumed, it is literally being pulled into the sky. Rock formations that have not been visible since the Hoover Dam was built in 1936 are now standing fully exposed in the desert sun. Geological features that were underwater for 90 years are seeing daylight for the first time in a human lifetime. Researchers have described it as watching the Earth's memory resurface, and the ecological damage beneath the surface is even worse than what is visible above it. The ecosystem that is dying. The Colorado River once supported an entire native ecosystem of fish species that evolved over millions of years in warm, turbid, sediment-rich water. When the dams were built and the reservoirs filled, the water became cold and clear, the exact opposite of what those fish needed. Non-native predator species were introduced, including striped bass, channel catfish, and northern pike. They decimated the native populations. The razorback sucker is one of the most iconic native fish of the Colorado River. First listed as endangered in 1991, it once populated the entire river system. Today, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, only one self-sustaining population remains in the wild. It is in Lake Mead. The population was estimated at 578 adults in 2023. 578 individual fish. That is all that is left of a species that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands across a river system stretching 1,450 miles. Environmental scientist Taylor McKinnon of the Center for Biological Diversity put it plainly. He said these fish are the canary in the coal mine, and the fact that they are on the brink of extinction signals an ecosystem in sharp decline. Our societies depend on a healthy Colorado River system, he said. And if these fish cannot hang on, a lot of the native species cannot hang on either. Grok's analysis mapped the decline of native fish populations against the reservoir's water level data and found a near-perfect inverse correlation. As the water dropped, native species collapsed. As non-native predators expanded, recruitment rates for young razorback suckers fell to near zero everywhere except Lake Mead itself. The AI flagged it as one of the clearest ecological cascade failures in any freshwater system it had analyzed. And the fish are just the visible part. The riparian habitats along the river's edges, the wetlands, the migratory bird corridors, the entire web of life that depended on a functioning Colorado River is fraying at every connection point. Why you were never told. Here is where the story becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Because the science has been available for decades, the data has been public, the projections have been clear, and the people in positions to act knew what was coming. The 1922 Compact was based on flawed data. Researchers identified this problem as early as the 1960s, when tree ring studies began revealing the true historical flow of the Colorado River. By the 1990s, it was broadly understood within the hydrology community that the river was overallocated. But here is the thing about water in the American West. Water rights are money. Water rights are political power. Water rights are the difference between a thriving agricultural operation and a bankrupt one, between a city that grows and a city that dies. Admitting that the river was overallocated meant someone had to give water back, and no one volunteered. Arizona's lead water negotiator, Tom Bishotsky, has described the current situation as a crisis. Colorado River Director Kevin Moran of the Environmental Defense Fund warned that the Colorado River is tanking, and the basin has reached the 11th hour for implementing collaborative solutions. 7 states have been negotiating for years over how to divide less water among more people. Those negotiations have repeatedly stalled. Some states have threatened litigation. The federal government has threatened unilateral cuts. The Bureau of Reclamation released its final environmental impact statement for post-2026 operations in July 2026, stating that future management must remain flexible in response to changing hydrological conditions. Flexible is a diplomatic word for something far more blunt. We don't know how much water will be left, and we need the legal room to cut whoever we have to cut. In May 2026, Arizona, California, and Nevada announced a plan to conserve up to 3.2 million acre-feet of water through 2028. But even that agreement comes against the backdrop of projections showing the reservoir continuing to fall, with the Bureau of Reclamation estimating the potential for up to an additional 40% reduction in Hoover Dam's hydropower generating capacity as early as the fall of 2026. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum has said the department has a responsibility to ensure the Colorado River system remains reliable and resilient. Those words sound reassuring until you realize that reliable and resilient describe the exact opposite of what the system currently is. Sarah Porter, director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University, said there was very little snowpack last winter, and 2026 has been one of the lowest runoff years on record. The reservoir has been on a more than 20-year downward trajectory, and the trend shows no sign of reversing. When Grok synthesized all of this, every federal projection, every state negotiation, every climate model, every tree ring study, every satellite image, it produced a single conclusion that reportedly left the research team silent for a long time before anyone spoke. The system was never designed to survive what is happening to it. It was designed for a river that existed during the wettest period in over 1,000 years. That river is gone, and no amount of conservation, negotiation, or emergency regulation will bring it back. What this means for you, this is not an abstract environmental story about a lake in the desert. This is a story about your water, your electricity, and your food. If you live in Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Los Angeles, or San Diego, Lake Mead is your water supply. If it reaches dead pool, no water flows downstream from Hoover Dam, period. If you eat salad between November and March, the lettuce, spinach, and leafy greens on your plate almost certainly came from farms irrigated by the Colorado River. Agriculture accounts for roughly 3/4 of the river's direct human water use. Alfalfa and hay, grown for cattle feed alone, consume about 1/3 of the entire river's flow. If the water stops, the farms stop. If the farms stop, grocery prices across the entire country climb. If you use electricity generated by Hoover Dam, that power is already diminishing. Hydropower output dropped 25% when the lake reached 1,067 feet in December 2021. It has been falling further since. Federal officials have warned of an additional 40% reduction as water levels continue to drop. That is energy that has to be replaced by something, and replacing it is neither cheap nor immediate. The combined water level of Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the nation's two largest reservoirs, fell to a historic low in July 2026. Together, the two reservoirs have not been this depleted since 1957, during the construction of Glen Canyon Dam, before Lake Powell had even finished filling for the first time. Stephen Fasnacht, a professor of snow hydrology at Colorado State University, said these reservoirs are crucial for agriculture and other water needs throughout the western states. Crucial is another diplomatic word. The undiplomatic version is that without them, the American West as it currently exists cannot function. What the AI actually said, Grok's full analysis reportedly ran across thousands of data sources, federal records, climate models, satellite imagery, geological surveys, and historical documents going back over a century. What distinguished the AI's output from existing research was not the individual findings. Most of the data points had been published before, in separate journals, in separate years, by separate researchers working in separate institutions. What Grok did was connect them. It mapped the 1922 compact's flawed water assumptions alongside the tree ring data, showing those assumptions were based on an anomalous wet period. It overlaid that with population growth data showing how demand outstripped supply decade by decade. It layered in the megadrought research showing the current dry period as the worst in 1,200 years. It added the satellite imagery showing the physical shrinkage of the reservoir in real time. It connected the ecological data showing native species collapse. and it traced the political negotiations, showing how 7 states spent decades unable to agree on how to use less of something that was running out. When the full picture was assembled, it did not look like a drought. It looked like a system that was mathematically certain to fail from the day it was designed, operating on borrowed time that finally ran out. The bathtub ring around Lake Mead is not just a geological curiosity. It is 170 feet of evidence, written in mineral deposits on canyon walls, that the American West built its cities, its farms, its power grid, and its economy on a promise the Colorado River was never capable of keeping. And the AI that finally said it plainly was not built to study water. It was built to find patterns. It found this one because the pattern was impossible to miss once you laid all the data in the same frame. Final thoughts. Lake Mead has been telling this story for 25 years. The water has been dropping, the bathtub ring has been growing, the ghost town has been rising, the bodies have been surfacing, the fish have been dying, the projections have been getting worse every single year. And the world kept looking the other way because the truth was too expensive. Admitting the river was overallocated meant someone had to lose water. Admitting the drought was structural meant the solution was not waiting for rain. Admitting the system was failing meant rebuilding it from scratch. Nobody wanted to say it, so an artificial intelligence built by a tech company in California said it instead. Grok found a 104-year-old legal document based on the wettest data in 1,000 years, still governing how 40 million people access water in the driest period in 1,200 years. It found a reservoir 3/4 empty and still dropping. It found a hydropower system losing capacity by the month. It found an ecosystem in freefall. And it found 7 states still arguing about who should take the first cut. If the most important reservoir in the United States has been draining in plain sight for a quarter century, while the institutions responsible for managing it spent that time negotiating over who should sacrifice first, what else are we being told is fine that is quietly falling apart beneath the surface? Does knowing this change how you see the water that comes out of your tap? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everything. If this video opened your eyes to something you had never fully understood before, hit that like button and subscribe, because the next video goes directly into the Colorado River Compact itself, the 100-year-old deal that divided a river between 7 states based on science that was wrong from day one, and the fight now underway that will determine who keeps their water and who loses it. You will not want to miss it.